everyone, welcome back. My name's Morgan. This is my channel, Pisces Paperbacks, and today I'm going to be doing my July wrap-up. I read 10 books in July, which is super exciting. It's the most I've read in 1 month so far this year. Hopefully I can keep that momentum going, although it is August 4th and I've not read anything. Let's just get into what I have read last month. I read 10 things, I have them written down right here, and I'm going to be, again, trying out doing it in lowest rated to highest rated rather than chronological order. I can't tell if I like doing it in this order or not, so I'm just gonna try it again, see how it goes. I have it written down this time. I don't remember how I did it last time, but hopefully this will just be a little easier, more organized for me. I also have the Olympic track and field sprint trials running on my phone. I love the Olympics. I got Peacock so I could watch the Olympics. I've been watching it literally nonstop for like more than a week now, and I think people should start watching the canoe slalom events. Right now they're just doing kayak cross, but if you want to go back and watch the replay of like the women's final for canoe slalom, it was so action-packed, so much fun. I just love the Olympics. So let's get into the books I read in July. The first book I want to talk about is Dead Dead Girls by Nakesa Afia. I talked a lot about this in my reading my lowest rated books on my TBR vlog, so I'll link that up above. But this is my lowest rated book of the month. I rated it like a 1.75, definitely giving it 2 on like Goodreads because I don't think, it didn't enrage me. It wasn't problematic. It didn't do the things that I think 1-star books deserve to get, but I really, really did not enjoy the reading experience of this. So this is a historical mystery set during the Harlem Renaissance about Louise Lloyd. She is a 26-year-old. As a teenager, she was kidnapped by a serial killer but escaped with a couple other of his victims. And so now, as an adult, black girls are starting to show up dead around the areas where she lives, works, frequents. And so she, through a series of events where she gets into an altercation with a police officer, ends up having to help investigate this new serial killer. And that sounds so interesting, but unfortunately I just really did not enjoy the characters, didn't enjoy the world building, just very odd. I just didn't like how it was written, unfortunately. I was hoping it would be kind of more funny because it has such a funny epigraph or like dedication to Aaron Tveit, which is so funny, but it just wasn't for me. So that's kind of a letdown, 1.75 stars. I will also say it has a queer main character and she has a girlfriend. And I know gay people it doesn't need to be about them being gay. I get that. It can just be part of their character and who they are. But if you're gonna have it be an aspect of the character that she has a girlfriend, maybe make that girlfriend feel like a person who actually exists rather than some girl she barely talks to and just gets drunk with. I don't know. Not for me. I don't have any books that I rated 2 stars, 2.5, or anything like that this month, but I did rate a book 3 stars, and that is The Trap by Catherine Ryan Howard. I picked up this book because I saw it in a bookstore in the airport right before we were about to leave to go to Ireland, and I was like, oh, you know, just looking at it, but it was by an Irish author set in Dublin and like the surrounding Irish landscape, and I was like, oh my god, this is perfect. So I got the audiobook while I was there. I listened to the first couple hours walking around Dublin, which was so fun, and then I finished it once I got home in July. So this is a thriller. The main character of this story, whose name I do not remember, is a woman whose sister disappeared a year prior to the story starting. She disappeared and there really wasn't that much investigation. She was out partying with friends, she was drunk, she wandered off by herself, she, you know, left her phone and wallet behind, and for all intents and purposes, because she wasn't like the most delightful person to be around, there just wasn't a lot of like people looking for her. But there's now been another girl who was young and lovely, everybody loved her, and so the police are like, actually there's a serial killer, your sister was one of the victims, and now we're like getting this kind of crew together to put the investigation more towards the forefront. So that's all already happened. The sister is like, why didn't you care about finding my sister before this teenager was kidnapped? Like, where was the effort there? So that's one aspect of the story. The other aspect of the story is that there is a woman who is a civilian working with the police who discovers some evidence about a unrelated disappearance that may or may not actually be related to the serial killer. And then there are interstitial chapters from the serial killer's perspective. And it was interesting. I struggle overall with thrillers. I find them a little bit tedious because so much of it is like building up suspense rather than actual investigation, which is what I love. I really enjoy mysteries, But I found this one pretty interesting. It really kept me going. I really liked the 3 different perspectives. I feel like they didn't take too long in each of them. And I really did like the sections with the serial killer. I only gave it a 3 though because, well, I didn't love it. First of all, I wasn't like in love with it. But also I really did not like how it ended. It was just, I don't want to give it away because it was an interesting story and it is an interesting take on the serial killer kind of like thriller genre, but I just didn't like it. So I gave it a 3. Next, at 3.5 stars, I have The Pallbearers Club by Paul Tremblay. I also read this in my lowest rated books on my Goodreads TBR vlog, so watch that one for more thoughts. But this was the lowest book on my TBR. It has an average rating on Goodreads, at least last time I checked, of 3.1, which seems insane. I know I'm giving it a 3.25, which is basically the same as a 3.1, but it does seem a bit harsh for me somehow. This book is really interesting. It is about a guy named Art, and he is writing a memoir about basically about his friendship with this girl Mercy he meets in the summer of 1988 when he is 17. He is kind of a sickly kid, kind of lonely, and he's looking to stand out on college applications, so he starts this thing called the Pallbearers Club, which is just him and Mercy. They are the Pallbearers Club. They're going to the funeral home, and they are pallbearers for people who really don't have anybody coming to their funerals. And that's the very beginning of the story. It kind of becomes more a years-long coming-of-age story about their relationship and their friendship and how it shapes Art and his paranoia almost. He becomes convinced that there is kind of like this vampiric entity kind of related to Mercy or their friendship, and it follows him throughout his life. So this is horror, but it's really, to me, more suspense. It's written in a really interesting way. So I said that this was his memoir, and it is written as if it is his memoir. So it's from his perspective, first person, him telling his story. But what's really interesting about it is that the framing narrative of kind of the interactions between the 2 characters is that Mercy has found the manuscript and is reading his manuscript of his memoir of their friendship and responding. So you'll read and you'll see like she's crossing things out and adding little comments. It's really interesting. And then after each chapter, you get a whole section that is her notes and thoughts on the chapter. So I love epistolary novels, and one of the reasons that I really, really enjoyed reading this book is because I loved the interaction between their 2 perspectives. But unfortunately, one of the reasons I didn't like the book is because I did find the story very slow. I found Mercy like a really annoying, infuriating character. I picked up this book because Kayla from Books and Lala really, really loved it, and sometimes she really loves weird things that I end up really loving. Specifically, Bunny is one of my favorite books I've read in years, and she recommended that highly, and that's why I read it. And so I was really hoping that I would like this. Kayla, in one of her videos, I distinctly remember saying Mercy is one of her new favorite characters of all time. I found Mercy almost insufferable. So I don't know, but there are some scenes in this that I think were really scary and interesting, and I just really liked. So I really liked the end. I liked the way you can interpret this book. I'm gonna really give it more of like a 3.5, but I just feel so mixed about it that I just can't give it more than that. Another book I rated 3.5 stars is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. So this is a nonfiction book basically about the natural world and plants. I believe that the author is a botanist or someone who studies like the science of plants, but it's also about like indigenous relationships and stories and connections to nature and kind of connecting back with nature in a world that has become extremely disconnected from the way nature and plants and ecosystems interact with our daily lives very, very deeply. So on the one hand, I find that this book was so beautifully written. I really liked listening to each chapter as if it was an individual essay. So I would pause in between chapters and like do something else, and then I would listen to another chapter rather than just like slamming through them all in a row. I think that also helped a little bit with not getting as repetitive as I think it could be. This book I listened to it on audio. Maybe it would have been better if I read it physically. This is a 17-hour audiobook. I had just finished an audiobook of a book like right before this that was, I think, a 12-hour audiobook, and it was only 40 pages shorter. So I don't know where that, like, disconnect between length. I know it's probably just the performance. You know, she's probably just talking slower in the original recording, but it felt interminably long when I was listening to it. So it was, that brings the rating down a lot. I liked a lot of the ideas. I liked a lot of the stories in this. I thought it was so interesting, and I will say, I was listening to it and I was like, I'm so annoyed this is taking forever to listen to, but then at the same time I'd be walking my dog through the park and be thinking, I don't even know what kinds of trees these are. Like, I'm so disconnected from the nature around me. And I find it very interesting that this book has stuck with me in some ways, like the connections between different things, like in life and nature and whatever. I think about it a lot. I feel like I learned a lot from this book. Did I enjoy listening to it? Not that much. So 3.5 is kind of the best I could do. The next book I rated 4 stars, and it's another audiobook, another nonfiction. I was really into nonfiction this month, and it was Refusing Compulsory Sexuality, A Black Asexual Lens on Our Sex-Obsessed Culture by Sherronda J. Brown. I've really been struggling to say the title of that book. But this, like it says, is a look at our culture and the way that sexuality, not just like gay, straight, like sexuality who you're attracted to, but sexuality as in the desire for sexual relationships, how that as a part of our culture is kind of looked at from the lens of a Black asexual person. So Sherronda J. Brown does a really, really good job exploring a lot of different ways to look at this topic. I wasn't expecting it to be so academic, which is the first thing I should have. It's, I believe, from an academic press. I think it's just, the last book I read about asexuality was more about like personal essays, not personal essays. It was the author kind of going and interviewing different asexual people to learn their personal relationship with asexuality, whereas this is more of a cultural critique and a cultural analysis of sexuality when Black asexuality and those two aspects together and separately are at play. I found it very interesting. I found it very educational. I thought this was really, really good. I highly recommend for anybody who's interested in learning about asexuality, but also kind of continuing the conversation about asexuality while bringing race into the equation. It's just very, very well done. The last book I finished in July, and the next one I want to talk about, is The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. This is a book that I've owned for 4 years since it came out, because I had Book of the Month for about 3 months in 2020, so I've had this for a while. It was such a big book the year it came out, and honestly, rightfully so. This is a really beautifully woven story about 2 women who are identical twins. They grow up in a town that is exclusively populated by very light Black people, and they are both very, very light-skinned. And so as adults, one of them decides to leave New Orleans, where they both live, and kind of live her life as a white woman married to a white man, and the other one marries a Black man and eventually moves back to her hometown with her very dark-skinned daughter. So it's the way that their 2 lives diverge, and the paths that they take, and also the relationships that their daughters eventually have when their paths cross. One who is a very, very dark-skinned woman, and the other one who grows up knowing and believing that she is white. And it is so beautifully written. I will say, I'm giving it 4 stars. I completely understand why everybody loves this book. Highly recommend. Beautifully written, beautifully told. The way that the different stories weave together, I found very satisfying and interesting. When I was listening to the audiobook, I did read this by audio. It was good. It was a good audiobook. When I was listening to it, there was never a time where I was like, ugh, don't want to read this. When I was listening to it, I was like, yes, this is interesting. What's next? What's happening next? When I wasn't reading it and I wasn't listening to it, I literally could have forgotten about it. And I know that is probably on me. I don't really love generational stories. I don't really love read general historical fiction anymore. It kind of has multiple aspects to it that kind of immediately aren't winners for me. So it was kind of starting lower, unfortunately, which I know that's not fair to the book, but that's just what happens when you are a human with opinions and subjective feelings about different tropes and different ways to build a story. But as I was considering what to rate it, due to just quality of book on its own, I just can't do anything lower than 4 stars. There's a fly in my house. If you see my cat batting around and stuff, it's probably that. But this was so beautiful. If you are interested in at all in that story and the plot I described, I do really recommend it, especially for people who like literary historical fiction or just literary fiction in general. This is, I think, a very good intro to literary fiction. As someone who really doesn't read that much of it at all, I found this very easy and interesting and good to get into, while not being like my favorite book of all time. Quick break while my cat gets in my lap, but the next book I want to talk about is Banned Sinister by K.J. Charles. This is a really good historical romance novel between two men, and one of them is, he's gentry, but he's extremely poor. He and his sister live on the charity of their aunt, and they basically avoid scandal at all costs. Like, they cannot afford to get in trouble because their aunt will just cut them off and they'll just like be broke and die, basically. And they, through a series of events, end up basically trapped at the house of their neighbor. He is a rake, he has a terrible reputation, and he and his friends kind of court this infamy by being ridiculous and a little bit, you know, contrary to society. They are also basically all gay, and it's just a house full of dudes, you know, hanging out, doing weird things, courting scandal. And so this guy, oh my god, I wish I could remember their names. Let me look up their names. So the guy and his sister, who are gentry but broke, his name is Guy, which is really convenient. And then the next door neighbor's name is Philip. Some backstory you also need to know is that Guy and his sister hate Philip's family because his older brother is basically the reason that they're broke. It's a long story, you find out in the book. But while they're trapped at this house, Guy and Philip are kind of getting to know each other, getting to kind of feel each other out. And it is a really sweet romance between the two of them, learning about each other and understanding each other and learning how to communicate. Philip, doesn't know anything about Guy in his life and what their situation is. And he also feels very, very guilty, kind of, for being basically related to the reason that their lives have been very, very difficult for the last 20 years. So I really, really liked this. There were parts of it where I was like, I've never read K.J. Charles before, but you cannot be into historical romance and queer historical romance without encountering their books eventually. So I'm so glad this was the first one I've read. It was a recommendation by Mina from Mina Reads. I think she gave it 5 stars on Goodreads like a year and a half ago, and I just bought it immediately. So I read the ebook, and the dialogue, the flirting, it was really phenomenal. It's very, very well done. Another 4.5 that I read this month was The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating by Elisabeth Tova Bailey. This is a really short, interesting nonfiction book about a woman, the main character, the author, Elisabeth Tova Bailey, who several years ago got very, very ill very suddenly on a trip in Europe. And when she came home, she found herself basically bedbound. She very suddenly developed extreme chronic illness, chronic fatigue, and she couldn't do anything anymore. She went from having a very active lifestyle in a farmhouse kind of in the woods to really not being able to do anything and just focusing on her health, which was, iffy at best. And one of her friends coming to visit her one time was basically like, I found this snail while I was walking around and I thought you'd like it. And so she develops this relationship and this rapport, this fondness for this snail, and decides to start learning about them and kind of relates to this snail and its slower lifestyle and not being able to do some things, and slow and steady wins the race. And it is a very gorgeously written book. It has kind of shorter sentences. It's not flowery, but it really is crystal clear to the heart of describing nature and the beauty of these snails. So it's a book about chronic illness, but also really about learning about snails. You learn so much about snails, but also you see this woman's, over the course of 1 year, how she learns from the snails and kind of applies that to her own processing of what is happening in her life. I thought this was so well done. I thought it was really interesting. She uses a lot of scientific texts. She quotes a lot of things, but the scientific texts that she quotes are not boring, because she is very inspired by the way that scientists of the 1800s 17 and 1800s wrote about nature, because they aren't confined by the more like stolid, serious, you know, things haven't been understood or defined yet. So scientists back in the day wrote about nature and snails with this kind of poetic enthusiasm that you just don't see in like modern scientific texts a lot of the time. So you get these like weird poems and excerpts from scientific like essays from the 1800s, and you're like, huh, I guess, but that's fun. And it's just like, it's a very moving book. I really, really loved it. 4.5, I don't know, it just feels like a 4.5. I don't think it's a 5-star, but I do think it is a book that I'm going to like recommend to people a lot. So if upon reflection in like a year, I'm like, yeah, I still think about it, I still talk about it, I still recommend it, I might retroactively bump it up to 5 stars, but for now, 4.5. But speaking of 5 stars, the first of the two I want to talk about is If You'll Have Me by Eunnie. I talked about this in my mid-year wrap-up as, like, I think the book that made me happy. This is an adorable graphic novel about these two girls. I think it's categorized as YA, but it does take place during their freshman year of college. So it's kind of that, like, crossover, new adult vibe. Very good for fans of Heartstopper, which is me. So, just saying. This is adorable. It's about Momo and PG. And Momo is kind of quiet. She's never dated. She's been really focused on school. And PG is a player. She sleeps with every girl on campus, and she cannot be tied down. And Momo immediately has a crush on her, of course, but they develop this really, really sweet friendship and these feelings for each other. And it is really just a sweet, simple story about them getting to know each other and, you know, developing feelings and figuring that out. And it's just so good. It has a beautiful color. It's like so colorful. I feel like sometimes graphic novels have the beautiful cover that is colorful, but then the book itself is like more like black and white with maybe just one or a limited color palette. But I read it, absolutely loved it, and I went to Barnes & Noble like a week later and I bought it, kind of because I just think my girlfriend would like it, and I think she's more likely to read it if I have it physically available to present to her at any opportunity. So cute. Loved it. And then the last book I want to talk about, and the reason I really couldn't give any other book 5 stars is because it's so hard to compare to this one, and that is What My Bones Know by Stephanie Fu. This book I read because it was recommended by Sarah Shower on Instagram and TikTok, and this is a nonfiction memoir by the author. I believe the subtitle is A Memoir of Healing from Complex Trauma. The author is diagnosed in her 30s with complex PTSD because of her extremely abusive childhood. So it's about her kind of recounting her childhood in the first part, and then as an adult investigating what does it mean to have complex PTSD, and how do you heal from that? What therapies are available? What does it mean to not trust your own memory? And kind of the process that she goes through trying to begin and get into healing from this thing that she has just been diagnosed with. And it is so beautiful. It's very difficult to read, and especially the first section when she's kind of detailing her childhood and teenage years, which is just very difficult. But the way that she talks about relationships and trauma, it was just so very well done. I was reading it, I felt like I learned a lot, and then I started reading my next book, and I was like, I'm like making connections because of that book that I just read. I'm like making inferences and connections about this new thing that I'm reading that I would not have made before. So I really feel like, you know, when you read, you know, in school when you like learn something and it clicks, that's how I feel this book did to me. I feel like learning about her trauma and the way that she was learning about her trauma and the ways to heal from and through complex PTSD, I was like, oh my gosh, the whole world of nonfiction basically and memoir and like history just feels like opened up to me. I don't know, it was so good. That's my best book of the month. It's one of my best books of the year so far, and I just think it's so good. I might buy a physical copy just to have. That's what I did with In the Dream House and Little Weirds, my 2 other favorite memoirs, and it's just phenomenal. All right, let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought. Let me know if I've maybe convinced you to read some of them, or maybe to not read some of them. I don't know. Leave a comment. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!